Hey everybody, welcome to the Marquez Says Show. I'm your host, Marquez Mosher, and this is my co-host, cohort, and eldest son, Austin Jordan. He and I always seem to bring out the feisty side of each other, and it leads to some very spirited conversations. There's never really any one topic. We see the world from many different perspectives, and sometimes we agree, and sometimes we don't. Either way, it gets very interesting, so sit back, relax, and have a bit of fun at our expense as we explore some of the most unexpected perspectives you'll ever hear about the world we live in. So, let's get started. Dun, 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 dun. And we're up and running.
Hello, Marquez.
Hello. Welcome to the Marquez Says Show. I am Marquez. This is...
William Shatner's impersonator.
Wow, not even close. Not even close.
Well, I was going to say...
Are you trying to be William Shatner? And that's all he's ever going to be known for, huh?
Probably. I'll remember him as Juliet's dad off of Psych. Or from the Trivago commercials. He branched out. He hit a second prime.
And before Star Trek, he was actually becoming a relatively established actor.
He was on Star Trek?
And moving on.
Just kidding, I knew that.
So.
He played Spock.
Yeah, exactly. This is what I had to live with while he was growing up.
Who do you think made me this way? Also,
not me.
I just watched Joker 2 again, which is a great movie, but I have a bunch of just horrible jokes, energy going through me now.
Oh, great. That's what Joker will do to you.
I almost came in and I almost went, hello, Murray. But I figured that was too derivative.
I would have understood it, but it would have been pointless.
Yeah.
So.
Movie made over $1 billion. I'm sure some of our audience would have got it.
Yeah. I mean, I didn't expect them not to get it. Just kind of curious about why you would. Anyway, moving on. So, today's going to be an interesting topic because we're going to go into masculinity and femininity.
Can I just interject there?
Sure.
We can't say it's going to be an interesting topic every single time. Because then it just becomes a topic. We are just topic people.
No, we have an interesting show then.
Okay, that works. But that's like the same thing. What does our show consist of?
Continuously interesting topics. It's creating... Hey, I don't think there's anything wrong with that.
I love it.
Okay, it's better than... You know what? We don't have a really good topic this week.
We're really phoning it in.
we're just going to
We ran out of ideas after the third week. We're just like, having fun at this point.
These are always designed just to be conversations. And it's amazing how a lot of the conversation happens after or before we hit record.
Yeah.
So, but this one was on one of my lists because we hear all the different variations, masculinity, femininity, and yes, we don't have a female on, so this is going to be probably a part one of a part two because obviously I'd like to get another perspective other than two guys sitting up here talking about it. But we'll dwell more on.
What are we, the Republican National Convention?
Two people or just two guys?
Guys.
Okay. So
talking about things they're not qualified to talk about.
Ouch.
Ooh.
So. Yeah, and that's a great. I mean, everything this year, of course, kind of ties into politics too, because you've election year. You got the president. You got the different things going on. I mean, you could just go off on tangents, a ton of those.
We frequently do.
Yeah, and a lot of it is how is your reaction when you hear like the election last time when President Trump got caught on the Access Hollywood tape saying that those things about what he could do to a woman because he was rich and all that stuff. As a guy, how did that make you feel? How did it because a lot of guys took it as, yep, locker room talk, it was just, we didn't mean anything by it, blah, 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 and all that stuff. I that was not my opinion of it, but what did you think?
I mean, I was torn. So 2016, I was what? I was like 19 years old.
I don't know.
Yeah, 19 years old. So like I thought it was wrong. I thought it was gross because it's like just saying that even as a celebrity, it's just weird. Like, how are you going to use your celebrity status to like do that? It's just weird. And I understand because I do say, and especially back then, say very questionable jokes that had I been recorded would probably come off really poorly. So,
but there was a big difference between like the severity of what he was saying versus some of the jokes that guys can say.
Exactly, and that's where I'm leading into this. That's the point. Is that it was just the severity, and then take into account who said it. This is a man with crazy elevated status, all the money in the world, celebrity, who
was running for president.
Right. If somebody if I were to make those comments, it doesn't come off as severe because it's like, oh, well, the whole principle, the whole backbone of his statement was because of his status. He can do this.
Yeah.
So it kind of takes away a little level, the veil of the joke. And not to say whether it was a joke or not, but it certainly casts doubt on, it's just weird and it's creepy. This dude's an old man.
Yeah.
It was just weird.
And things that we've known before and after, we also realized that he wasn't joking. I mean, he actually meant those things. Now, whether he had actually ever done them is another question.
Right.
But he meant it. I mean, he truly believed it.
Yeah,
and
he
that's
truly believed he can get away with it.
And that's the part that, and as a guy for me and stuff, especially with daughters, et cetera, I was just kind of like, enough. I mean, I never fit in with that locker room type of talk and stuff because I didn't really participate. I mean, I can't say that I didn't because I can't remember all the way back to my high school years and all the stuff that, was said and everything. And I know I'm sure I've made the sexist jokes and stuff of that sort, in the sense of, I should say sexist as putting down women, but sexist as in, not thinking as highly of them. But now, I mean, even then I didn't do it very often, and it was usually probably out of peer pressure, which really sucks for that part. But it was just to me, it just seems like a lack of awareness. It's a lack of empathy, and at this point, I would call out guys who said it. Oh, I mean, older guys, young kids. At this point, I mean, I think I've even done it before where I've heard something and I went, no, that's not cool. Because that mentality is that part about where we realize that in and of itself, one example or one instance may not seem so big, but that breaks down into a mentality. Mm-hmm. It breaks into a mindset where then guys may think it's okay to do that on a grander scale or a bigger scale, or it becomes acceptable, and it's not. And that's the part where guys kind of have to step up to each other and say, dude, no. Like when they make a comment about, something about, Friday or Saturday night and how it was so easy, blah, 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 and stuff. It's like, nah, I don't want to hear that. That's not cool. That's not the way we need to be talking about women. And it's something that's going to take generations to break, just because it's been prevalent almost since the start of time. And I don't know whether or not that builds into, this quote unquote toxic masculinity, or, how that, because I'll be honest, I'm still a little bit lost on what toxic masculinity is.
Well, the way I understand it is toxic masculinity is basically doubling down on macho aspects. So being overly aggressive, overly I'm the man.
Right.
Overly basically shying away from displaying any emotion, being emotionally unavailable. I guess those are kind of the same thing. Not exactly. But there's some differences.
That stuff.
And then being manipulative in the sense that, well, I can do this because I'm a man, so I can do certain things because of the fact that I'm a man and I don't have certain expectations, or life is different for me.
And all that stuff sounds like it comes from a place of deficiency.
Yeah.
And I believe it's like, if that idea of toxic masculinity, or just, I think that's just a new term, again, as we've talked about on other shows, and the theme of it is that this may be a new term, but it's not a new thing.
No.
It's just called, before machismo. Other people would call it, whatever, being a jerk. I mean, it's just being a creep, egocentric. I mean, you can talk about it in many different ways.
Right. And I think that a lot of it, the resurgence of these, not even the resurgence, they've always been there. I can't, the thing is I can since I was a little kid, I always remember, men acting that way, or people making those critiques of men. Maybe it was just because I grew up around a lot of men that weren't exactly all that great, so I got to see that sort of thing. But a lot of it right now is you have a lot of younger people, teenagers, or maybe even in my age group, who are going online and doing online dating or just social media and all this stuff, who are being subjected to it in a way that hasn't existed in previous generations. So some of these toxic masculinity attributes are coming out through these text conversations or DMs, instant messages, whatever, in ways that are just different. than what used to be around. And there's the just like the whole idea of sleeping around culture and one night stands and, well, I'm not emotionally available for this, so I'm going to do this. There's certain people exploiting that, generally on the men's side. And it's contributing, basically all this stuff happening with people being frustrated and men abusing certain things is basically bubbled into like this new term of like, oh, toxic masculinity.
Yeah. And
contributed to it.
And it's funny because I'm still, you look at it and like, well, why can't just there be more gentlemen? And on the surface, that sounds great. Being a gentleman in the purest sense of the word, as far as the good attributes of it. But let's not forget, at some point when people were gentlemen, they were the worst. They were the ones that would just, quote unquote, take what they wanted whenever they wanted. And, so let's not have such a rosy vision of...
Were they really gentlemen, though?
Well, that's a great question, because it was considered gentlemanly, a gentleman's club, things of all that sort.
But they're still called that.
Yeah.
Let's think about that real quick. A lot of strip clubs and stuff like that, topless bars, are still called gentlemen's clubs.
Yeah. So that word, I think, has many different meanings, and I like to look at it from the positives of it, where a gentleman does mean opening the door for someone. It does mean walking on the proper side of the street. It does mean, throwing something down over a puddle. That's an extreme kind of a romanticized version of it. But all of those things, and those things are the good things, and those are the things that we can actually, I think now people consider when they say, oh, he's such a gentleman. It's the good things and it's the good attributes of it. And I think that's something we need to cultivate more by telling guys, young men, and children as they're growing up, that that's okay. We talk about...
we definitely need to be preparing young men and teaching them those sorts of things.
Well, yeah,
because I've seen a lot, like especially in college. I always go back to those experiences because it's so different from what I got to see growing up, especially because growing up in a small town versus going to like college in LA, huge culture shock. So when I moved to LA and saw the amount of people, they didn't know a lot. They didn't like some of that small town charm type of stuff. Mm-hmm. They didn't know, and it's not their fault because they don't know. Like they can't. Well, you can't exercise what you don't know.
Well, culture plays a huge part of it.
Yeah, and that's tough because then you get into the whole. Well, is this culture worse because of this, or is it worse? And then it's just a whole. It's more division, which we absolutely don't need.
Yeah, and that culture shock that you talk about is one of those things where it can go across the board, that certain traits like manners don't go away. But yet, guess what? They're not always taught. They're not always actually given that, because sometimes you've got kids growing up in atmospheres where they have to grow up a lot sooner. And if a boy has to grow up a lot sooner, it is definitely going to revolve around what role models he has. Mm-hmm. That's a huge part of it. And if those role models aren't decent, at least at a minimum, then you're just going to perpetuate that cycle.
Right.
And then the masculinity aspect of things, there's nothing wrong with masculinity, femininity, because they should be working complementary. They're not opposites. And I think that's a big thing that people think of, that they're opposites, totally. and they're not.
I'm glad you said that, because there's this thing of like, basically, there's a large amount of, it's very vocal of, well, we need to get rid of these terms completely. I don't think we need to. I don't think that's true at all, because, and by saying that statement implies that one is supposed to be better than the other. Right. And that's not at all what it is. There are just certain things that fall into those categories, and they're all equally good. It doesn't mean that we live in a society that has typically valued more masculine traits. True. But that doesn't mean that all of a sudden now, to fix that, we get rid of it. No, we just hold the other attributes to the same standard, and everything goes up. And that's important. And I like that you had just said that right now. Yeah, because it's a huge thing that they're not, it's not one or the other. And I talk about this with like work-life balance and integration. So many things that we talk about as a balance implies that like a seesaw, where for one and the other. And in some ways that may be the general flow of it. But the idea behind that, though, is that there's still an equilibrium, and that equilibrium is actually a balance and an integration of the two. So it doesn't have to be all or one. It's a very difficult thing for some people, I think, to wrap their head around, because for a guy, a typical, quote unquote, typical guy, he may or may not want to give up some of the benefits
or integrate, with the fact that women can something, almost anything can be done the same way. There's some things that men can do, some things women can do, some things that women can do that better than men, some things that men can do better than women. It's okay.
Yeah.
And to understand the strengths and weaknesses. And I think the biggest part of that statement, that there's some things that guys can do better than women, and there's some things that women can do better than men. That is not a stereotype. Because we're not talking about what things at all. Because what if it's a guy, who does something that's traditionally feminine, can do it better, and damn well that there's women who can do something that's traditionally masculine. That's perfectly fine. But for some reason, we throw up red flags, and we get all up in arms about if the woman is doing something better than what, quote unquote, the guy's supposed to do. And therein lies the problem. Therein lies the problem, is that instead of teaching our young men to be like, hey, if she can do it better, let her.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
You don't hear that. It's like, oh, and I think the next part of that goes into, the emotional aspect of it. Because, that if you're already set up that a woman isn't supposed to, quote unquote, do that, or it certainly isn't supposed to do it as good, you're just setting yourself up now for a whole host of problems when it comes to other aspects of your life.
Well, of course. And then basically you start to if you're taught that as a young man, you start to internalize the fact, well, I'm better in all aspects. Whether you were being told that in one or not, you're going to start to internalize it. And that's absolutely wrong. You were talking about emotions. I think that's important. Is a lot of times in our society, men are taught not to share their emotions and to keep it more bottled in. And if you don't do that, that's more of a feminine thing. Now, it's starting to get a little bit more away from that now. It's starting to be a little more accepted. And then especially men going to therapy. That's another big one. That's definitely starting to turn tides a little bit. That's starting to be more accepted. But it wasn't for the longest. I remember being a kid, you weren't supposed to.
Absolutely.
Right. Like, you weren't supposed to at all. I mean, even now, we've got this whole wave of, like, simping, right? So it's kind of damned if you do, damned if you don't. If you express your feelings, then, like, people will make fun of you. But at least it's gotten to a point where it's okay to do that. And then it's jokes, but I mean, it's like anything. It's like a barrier. It's like the barrier of resistance to get someplace farther. It's starting to come back, but obviously you're going to have obstacles. So it's like, yeah, you can do this. We're kind of going to make fun of you, though, but it's a little more accepted.
Well, and that's true. And then sometimes it takes those little steps because, at one point it was considered acceptable for a husband to basically beat his wife because he could. Because there was going to be no repercussions. There was going to be no ramifications of those, choices and stuff. And thank God that's not what we look at it anymore. But that concept that anyone can do something along those lines. I mean, and on the other side, on the flip side of that, there's always this risk that I heard about when I was younger and stuff about how a woman's going to trap a guy by getting pregnant, and things of that sort.
It's that one's always been really dumb to me.
Well, but I
mean, it happened.
It does happen, and it is a fact.
Yeah.
But we want to basically, just like we want to believe that. Why would people do that? And like, why would a guy beat up his wife? Why would a woman? But those things are also stem from the emotional side of things. About if a guy is usually, I mean, obviously there's plenty wrong if a guy's hitting his wife or hitting a woman, hitting almost anybody in general. But you talked about the feelings about it. Most of that is because he's completely wrecked up inside trying to figure out what the hell's going on, in addition to whatever maybe psychological issues, mental issues, alcoholism, whatever else. And had he been able to realize that he could talk about it, like whether it was therapy or something, he may be able to move towards a resolution of some sort that did not result in such horrible actions.
Yeah, and it's really tough. I've talked about this with, like, a few of, like, my women friends and stuff like that. And there are a lot of them, because they've had from what I've gathered, from what I've heard secondhand, that it's almost gotten to the point where they think that's just kind of the male disposition. That it's not even so much that there's anything that they need to process inside. It's just part of being male. And that's sad, because that's how they've been treated. And honestly, it might be. Some of it might just be. But I don't necessarily, as a man myself, I don't feel that way.
Yeah, we get choices. I mean, and it is sad that women
sorry, to clarify that point, because it was a little vague. Like the whole thing about whether he knew he could talk about it, right? I've heard people take issue with that because then they go, oh, well, basically it's creating a way to then kind of explain it and excuse a behavior that is inexcusable or explainable.
Are you talking about Trump in the recording, or
no? About like the man who beats his wife.
Oh, okay.
And I understand where that's coming from. I personally, I mean, I think that we have to try to explain and everything, not excuse it, but I think we do have to try to.
There's a huge difference between an explanation and an excuse. I
agree.
And I've always said that, and it's a fine line, and it's very difficult for people to wrap their heads around that, because you can have an explanation, like an alcoholic drinks. They're an alcoholic. They have alcoholism, that disease. That's the explanation.
Right.
Is it an excuse? No. Because especially once you know it, if you actually can explain it, you really don't have any excuse, whether it's positive or negative. And most of the time, of course, it's negative, because at that point you have to make decisions, and or exceptions, like, or right. Meaning acceptance, I should say. Mm-hmm. So for the alcoholic, and more so for men, although women are as well, it's the realization that, you know, I like country music, but almost any time I hear a song that revolves around alcohol, I cringe, because there's not enough boundaries, and with young men, that they don't grow up understanding that alcohol is a choice, and it can be fine. Some people can handle it just fine, but mm-hmm. others can't. And that crutch that it becomes, most boys, if they learn that, if they see it, they don't know which one it is. They don't know if dad or uncle is drinking because they can handle it, or if it's because it's masking something. But they just know that it's okay. Mm-hmm. And they don't know whether or not, I mean, we don't know whether or not how it's going to affect them.
Right. That's actually a good, that illuminates a good point, is drinking. Drinking is a good one to distinguish between what we teach men versus women. Yeah. What do men drink?
Whiskey.
Sure.
Vodka.
I was going for beer, but that works.
I was going to say, well, women, a lot more women drink beer nowadays. That's why.
Right. That's not the stereotype, though.
No, they drink wine. What would you?
Right.
Of course, yeah.
And I think that's an interesting point to kind of illuminate the two. Is vodka really a men's drink? I would have said the vodka might have actually fallen in the women's category.
I think it depends on how you like. How it's made.
But I get your point, though. Of course, but right there,
I was thinking highballs. That's why.
I got you. So. Okay. But yeah, that's a good little again, and not so much anymore.
But actually, you know what? I take that. No, I don't think that's true. I think that it's just as prevalent, because you listen to these songs, like for country. Actually, I mean, it's not just country. I mean, you've got hip hop and rap, and they talk about Hennessy and all definitely. That stuff too. So, but when you talk about that alcohol, I cringe, because there is a influence that it has that isn't been reckoned with yet. And men, more than, I should say more than women, but men are more obvious in their struggles with it, which is sad, because women that struggle with it, they're getting a double whammy. Not only are they struggling with something because society says that they shouldn't be struggling with it, mm-hmm. they're just struggling with it, period. Whereas men seem to be a little more get off the hook about, oh, well, yes. He went to rehab.
Yep.
You know,
cool. That's a good segue. To bring it back to toxic masculinity, a lot of it is that men tend to get more passes. They get to make more mistakes, and they get to, you know, mm-hmm. all that stuff. And whether they atone for them or not, chances are they have a better likelihood of still being accepted. And then a lot of toxic masculinity comes from huge insecurities within men, generally speaking, from what the definition is. And I think that's a good way to put it, because then those insecurities, like what you said, then you try to mask them and you lash out and you do a bunch of stuff.
And everything about this was really, really frustrating, is that we sit here and talk about masculinity, femininity and stuff, and neither one of them have to, I mean, they have to exist, but it's all about individual choices. A guy should not think that because I'm a guy, I can make this decision. That's not cool.
Well, I don't think they do.
Well, I think it's subconscious, because they were raised that way. Like you mentioned about the inherent right to do something because I'm a guy. And that's ridiculous.
Right. I think that's true. Yeah, I guess subconsciously that's a decision.
Right, because
I don't know if that's so much a decision,
or
though.
They've been also taught.
It's been internalized. So that's how they'll act. And then honestly, there's a big thing too, is men are typically coddled more in society. Like our egos are tended to, like I would say, in my experiences, our egos are tended to more than other people.
It's interesting you say that, because when you said this statement, I'd be like, no, in my mind, I think traditionally, no, women are coddled because they're considered quote unquote the weaker species. So
I don't think so.
Well, but they're the ones that they're more fragile. They're weaker, etc. So we have to protect them. We have to coddle them. That was where when you went there. Mm-hmm. But I understand your angle of it. That, well, actually, I think that's a part about if a woman behaves in assertive manner, she almost immediately gets derogatory terms. Mm-hmm. Whereas a man, if he were assertive, he becomes positive terms.
Right.
And you're right. And those that dichotomy of but then again though, that's because of the male way of looking at it, because they feel threatened, because they think, oh my God, I'm going to lose my status. I'm going to lose something and be less of a person if I allow them to have more. And that's not the case.
Well, just think about traditionally, who is supposed to be subservient and please who in a relationship?
A dog.
No,
but yeah.
No,
so although you know what, some people actually would take that right there, that statement. Now I said it completely innocently, thinking that just a dog, obedient, et cetera, et cetera. But I guarantee you, somebody who's listening, or that maybe not listening, but just at some point, if you said that, they would assume you just associated women with the dog. Because
that's true.
Women, what you were fishing for
great,
was,
now we're getting canceled.
You know what I mean? But in my mind, and see, that's so far. That's how far removed I am from that.
Yeah, I didn't think
traditional thinking. And same thing with you.
Yeah,
we don't think like that. It wasn't the way. I mean, I wasn't raised that way. And it's funny because my dad was a typical guy. He started out like that, and through my old preteen and teen years, had to kind of adapt and become more modern, quote unquote, which taught me that A, you can change, that B, that typical quote unquote redneck kind of guy, obviously wasn't so good, because he decided that it was not the route that he wanted to go in.
Right.
And I think that's part of where, if you go into the deep South or Midwest, and where areas where there's still this idea that the guy is a guy, a man's a man. There's a wonderful place for that, because we need extremes on both sides in order to be able to see the progress that's made in the middle when people come together. Mm-hmm. And that's true almost on any subject. But the inherent idea is that you also understand, with those extremes on those sides, they're not the ones you need to look to. They're not the ones that are the shining examples.
Yeah, they're not
of what you
should model yourself after.
And yet that's not always the case. Sometimes they get more exposure. Oh, coming back to like the country music, I cringe where it says, there's songs where they talk about how their relationship started over alcohol, and she was getting a little bit tipsy and wanted to get kissed and stuff, and it's like, oh my God, you're talking about, are we blaming the song because if there's a guy who doesn't understand that it's still consent is needed, et cetera, et cetera? Mm-hmm. Okay, yes, you can have that argument about, well, what should we do? Are we going to censor the music and stuff? And it's like, no, of course not.
Right.
However, you can create that same environment and those lyrics in the song, but without putting it in the context of, hey, guess what? All of this happened because we got drunk. Like, there's a song right now that said something along the lines of something they were kissing, and then 9 months later there was the shotgun wedding, and then it was like, what? I mean, you just talked about how they didn't get married because they wanted to. They got married because she got pregnant. It started with because they were drinking in the first place.
Right.
The whole chorus is like, that's a nightmare. For parents that look at the son or the daughter, it's like, that's a nightmare. And of course, it ended well, but that's just because it's a song. Most of those times, those situations, they don't end well at all.
Yeah, I mean, that's true. I don't really have those strong feelings about stuff like that. Anytime it gets into music territory about anything that somebody's saying, it's a story.
No, I agree. But there is also some responsibility that has to be made with the storytellers, because you have to remember the genres. That's where I think it has to make a difference. If you're doing certain things like to promote stereotypes that are negative, that's not a good thing. I mean,
but who gets to decide? That's my biggest thing, though, is who gets to decide what stereotype is positive or negative.
But that's my point. Is the reason sometimes I get more upset at some of the simpler things that people overlook and go, now you're doing it because it's music, and I get that because you're in the music. But a lot of people will be like, because they drink, or they did get somebody pregnant and it was alcohol related or whatever, and they don't want to hear me saying, dude, I don't want to celebrate that, because they're going to look at it from their ideas that, well, it happened to me and that's my life.
Yeah.
But
and they should be able to feel how they want to feel about it.
But the truth of the matter is they almost, I would say across the board, a lot of those times they would have had it differently. They would have done it differently. They would have made different choices. But they didn't, because they didn't know they could. They thought that the process was just go to the bar, get drunk. You know what I mean? Okay, yeah, it's easier if you have a tipsy girl than a sober girl. You know, they think that's normal. They think that that's the way it's supposed to go. And that's the problem, is that it underlies a deeper problem that's not the way it's supposed to go. It can go that way, but as a norm, that's not what we should be. That's not how we should be approaching things.
Right. But again, I do think this kind of comes down to a matter of perspective. So how we're here, or saying basically like, oh, well, that isn't how the norm should be. We see a problem with it.
No, but Austin, this is one of those things that there really isn't it really is like a right or wrong, in the sense of,
okay, but how? We can't.
Okay, you shouldn't think that your way to get a woman is getting her drunk.
No, yeah, I agree, but we can't necessarily say that's what these songs are saying.
Oh, they are, though. No, some of them are extremely clear.
Well, then obviously those are weird.
But they're not. But they're mainstream. They're top 40 hits.
Yeah, but we got Robin Thicke out of here for talking about stuff like that and being weird.
But what my point is that you'll have so many people recognizing that is their life, that's the way, that the representation of them, that they will defend it, not because they have any true adherence to it or loyalty to it, just for the mere fact that they don't want to be wrong. They don't want to be considered wrong. They don't want to have to face that internally. And I think sometimes that's another thing about the masculinity and femininity thing, is that men, don't ask for directions, don't admit when you're wrong, don't cry, things of that sort. That's where guys go wrong, where it's kind of like, well, absolutely ask for directions. I mean, why? The fact that you're supposed to know it all.
Well, and then that comes back to the ego, though, is that, which is what my original point earlier was about, how our egos, and I say our because I'm saying all men, are coddled. And then again, that goes back to the point I was trying to illustrate of, is who's supposed to be subservient and please who? The women traditionally are expected to be subservient to their men. That right there, that statement alone proves that they're tending to us.
Yeah.
And that's the way that it's set up.
And it's funny because there's also a counterbalance to that, saying that, how is that even possible given that men can't give birth and women can't? Because just logically,
because it's topsy-turvy. Because
if you thought about it, if an alien came from outer space, they would obviously think that, the more powerful species is the one that can actually create another species. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, the more powerful gender of that species.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, my bad. Yeah, tying it up. Yeah, be more specific.
Yeah.
The gender. They would be like, but you're telling me that's not the case, and it's like, that doesn't even make any sense.
No, it doesn't. I agree.
So, and yet here we are, and we talk, and there's that talk about, I think in some religions, some cultures, some beliefs and stuff about, you hold the woman on high, she's your queen, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
But inherently, she's your queen. You're the king. Mm-hmm. Even right there is an assumption that the king and queen are not equal, because the king is higher than the queen. Now, you can't call a queen a king, I guess, but until we start saying that a king and a queen essentially are equal, and that each one should be able to make decisions depending on, what maybe the subject matter is, or between the two, where, they decide that these things I want you to see. What it really should come down to is, who knows more? If the woman, if you ask the woman, and it doesn't matter what it is, if it's like My Cousin Vinny, where the woman was obviously the expert witness for for those who don't know, My Cousin Vinny is a movie. Anyway, go check it out. And you know what I mean? It's like she had the knowledge.
Yeah.
Why wouldn't you go, like, if you had a choice between two mechanics and you knew that one's a guy, one's a girl, and you know that the Yelp reviews are that the woman is great and the Yelp reviews for the men, you're still going to have guys, and maybe women too, thinking that it's a mechanic. I should probably go to the guy.
Right.
Screw that.
Well,
go to the person who actually knows more, who's actually going to do it better.
It's just like, treat people like people. Like, it's just strange.
You know what? Because people are people, and why should it be?
I don't remember the lyrics to that song, even though it's my own song.
People are people, so why should it be? You and I should get along so easily.
That's the song I sampled for.
Yeah, it's Depeche Mode.
Yeah, I remember. Throwback to 5 years ago.
Not the original. Go check that one out too. People are people. Depeche Mode.
Yeah. But yeah, just like, people are people, and men and women. I mean, obviously there are differences, but we can't.
You know what?
There's so much objectification of women in general, and I think when people hear that, they think, oh, we're treating them like a physical object. Well, not necessarily so much in the physical sense, although that is extremely prevalent.
That's the biggest part of it, yeah.
Right, but there's an expectation of women to do certain things, and in that sense, it's almost like you're then saying in your mind that they're a tool, which then makes them an object emotionally as well. And that's not, I mean, obviously it's just not okay. It's tough for me to talk about this. I'm still learning. I'm still trying to figure some stuff out.
And you haven't met necessarily nearly as many people as like I have, especially with the jobs and the experiences and stuff that I've had, just as far as the opportunities to meet people, because I've run into women that embrace everything about femininity and use it to their advantage as wickedly as men do in the bad sense, and also ones that actually do the same thing, embrace everything that they have, and use it in such a good force as well. Mm-hmm. And there's men that do that as well. But when men do it, it's almost like, oh, you're in touch with your feelings. Oh, you can communicate. Yeah. Oh, what a wonderful man you are. What a great guy you are. When a woman does that, it's expected. Or it's actually considered, oh, there she goes again, talking about her feelings.
That's a good point, though, right there. So you say, oh, what a good, like, what a good, you said, what a good guy you are. We'll translate that to what a good person you are. So that's an advantage if you're a man. But if you're a woman, you're like expected to be like, that's like the
more
baseline
and
for you.
Able to talk and stuff.
Well, yeah, the baseline for you is basically you have to be good. Mm-hmm. You have to, and that's just
and that's where I think
derogatory.
The whole thing comes back to, as far as when we talk about, well, you know, what should a guy be defined as? Actually, women and men should be defined exactly the same. It just happens to be that one is a man and one is a woman. And that's something that's very difficult to do, because there is the reality that there's some things that guys can do that women cannot, and vice versa. It's just a reality, but that's a reality in everything, in every species. You've got some birds that can do some things that other birds can't. You've got some things that, you know, some fish can do that other fish can't. There's nothing wrong with that. It's when we start saying that you're weaker or better for those.
The valuation.
That's when.
Yeah, exactly. We have to change the valuation of these things.
And traditionally for men, we're considered like, see, when I think of men, I think of actually, obviously, my dad. I think of my grandpa. And my grandpa was full-on Mexican culture. And when he was younger, he had zoot suits, and he was not the best of guys. Then he went off to World War II, and he kind of came back a changed man. And a lot of the lessons that I got, other than my dad's, were from him, where he taught me some of the more traditional things as far as manners and stuff go. And it's funny because I bring it up because in the Latin culture, there's a machismo aspect to it.
Right.
And sometimes it can be very bad, where the guy is just treats the woman like horribly. You know, she's just nothing more than, like you said, like a tool, an appliance of sorts, blah, blah, blah. But on the other hand, there's also those who take it extremely personal and extremely, they take it to heart about, no, I am the leader of this family, and I am setting an example by respecting my wife.
Right.
She is on the same level as me. It's my responsibility to take care of her in these ways. It's her responsibility to take care of me and the family, of course, in these ways. And it becomes a dual role. And that same machismo can be used in such a positive way as opposed to a negative way. And that's the same thing that we can apply with the masculinity and femininity, is that let men do things, quote unquote, that they can do really well. But if they can't, that's fine if they're doing other things really, really well. And I think that's the crux of it, is that sometimes men who are expected to do XYZ really, really well and cannot, based on society's expectations, now all of a sudden they basically don't even try. Excuse me, they don't even try. They don't even try then to do other things and be excel at things that may not be more traditional men.
And a lot of times that sort of thing, they start to internalize that, and then they lash out and they act very poorly.
And it becomes an internal struggle.
And then, but again, we have to be careful about that whole internal struggle thing, because then it's basically saying, it starts to, even if we're saying that or not, it's what you always tell me. It gives ammunition for people to defend that.
Right, but it's not in this case, because Austin, it's still an internal struggle, period. They have a choice. They still have a choice on how they deal with it.
True. It's awareness.
So no, it doesn't give anybody ammunition. It's not like we talked about earlier with the excuse versus a explanation. I'm explaining that the reason they're lashing out, et cetera, the explanation is because of XYZ. Should they be doing XYZ? Hell no. Could they have avoided XYZ? Absolutely. So those decisions are all still right there. I know what you're going at, but it's not so much about. I don't think anybody's going to latch on and say, "Oh, well, I'm going to excuse them because they have an internal struggle going on." That's not. There's
a large community that'll basically say, "Well, you know what? This is what society did to them. They said that they weren't valued because they couldn't do this, and that's society's fault because these are totally fine people, and now they've been outcasted." And there will be people that will excuse that.
Well, they're going to excuse it for but that's not because of they're making up anything though. That's different. They're just coming up with excuses for anything. I mean, they're going to come up with an excuse no matter what. So I don't see that parallel. It's amazing. 41 minutes in and you do it again.
No,
you created, because we had this conversation. For those who don't know, the reason he said that was because we were talking about. We were talking about the basic police brutality.
Why are you doing that? I didn't bring this up.
You did.
He got all mad at me for derailing the conversation. I didn't.
No. What I'm talking about is just a couple minutes ago, you said you can't have it both ways, because when I talked about the internal struggle and you were relating it to a previous conversation we had last time.
Right.
But
I didn't fail.
But they don't know. They don't
need to. They don't have to have that sort of context.
Okay, but you called me out on something. Called me out on saying that I have a double standard, and I was defending myself, saying no, it's not a double standard. I didn't say
it was a double standard.
You said you can't have it both ways.
Right. I'm not saying that you're necessarily doing that. I'm just saying if they're the same thing,
they're not. See, and there we have a difference in opinion.
And we'll just have to agree to disagree on that.
That's not how it works. The idea behind this the masculinity and the femininity is that like, again, we talked about how the struggles that society says they're supposed to do this in a certain way. That in and of itself, I think, is what causes the problems. You talked about society's at fault. Is it?
No. Well, some of it, but that wasn't my point. My point was that I don't want to give any of these people ammunition to get away with anything. That was my point.
Right, and but they're not. And see, that's why I didn't think I was. I didn't think I was giving them ammunition.
I wasn't saying you were. You took it personally.
You literally called me out, Austin.
About a phrasing, but not about the ideology behind it.
You were saying that if I understand you correctly, by saying that, calling it an internal struggle, you were hesitant about calling it an internal struggle because you thought that would allow an excuse for people to say, see, it's not their fault.
Well, it does, but that doesn't mean that it's okay.
Explain that.
Because whenever anybody says internal struggle, then it can turn into, they're a tortured soul, or something has done this to make them feel this way. Let's fix that. Or in other words, let's coddle that, because some people won't know how to actually fix it. Now, I'm not saying that they don't have an internal struggle. I'm not saying that that's not necessarily true. I'm just saying that there are then people who will perpetuate the cycle.
So would you or would you not classify something as an internal struggle? Because
sometimes it is. But even if it is an internal struggle,
having a problem,
that doesn't mean that it's valid.
No,
so
of course
to
not.
be honest with you, sometimes if somebody's having an internal struggle, I do not care.
No,
I'll
absolutely.
be the first to say, like, that's
no, and I agree with you. That's
because
exactly
you should
my
know
point.
better, and
exactly.
that's the thing.
That's what I said.
But there will be people that will weaponize that sort of internal struggle thing, and then say that.
I think people will weaponize whatever they can if it suits their needs. Period.
True.
So,
that's true. We definitely agree on that.
With the internal struggle part of it. So so when we're talking about society setting that up, I guess it's a reflection of what we do as individuals is what creates society's expectations. So if we continue to perpetuate this myth of men having to be stronger, okay.
I don't know if that's so much true anymore, because now society, we're at a place where...
Who creates society's norms?
Generations before us did. So now we're in a place...
The individual decisions did.
Right, but before us. So now we're inheriting all these generational values. Okay. So we did not set these generational values, these things that we address.
Okay, I understand. Yeah.
We did not do that. So to say us as individuals, that's not true. So, we can shape the future.
Well, we can shape the here and now too, though.
Right, but not nearly as quickly.
No, not as... No.
And probably not in a way that's super influential. What we're going to do is going to lay groundwork for things that get better in the future.
Right. I believe, yes, absolutely. And so by teaching like the young children, young men, old men, actually, even old men, and calling them out when they do something that's just blatantly inhuman. I think we're talking about this, in the terms of men, women, femininity, masculinity. It's just actually inhuman. You don't treat somebody poorly just because you can. You don't treat someone poorly even if you cannot. Don't do it. It's just something that you don't want to perpetuate. And the little small micro part, I guess they call them like microaggressions, so to speak, in other aspects,
right,
is the same thing. It relates back to when I talk about, when someone says, oh, it's just locker room talk, or it's just boys being boys. That has to stop. That excuse, like you said, oh, it's just boys being boys. No, a little kid growing up, if he's growing up in an atmosphere where his father, his coaches, the people around him are all respectful to women, they don't say things, they're not talking about, ooh, I'd really like to hit that, and all these kind of things, like in the derogatory sense, he is not going to then think that it's okay to say those things, and won't. Mm-hmm. And then it continues and builds and builds. But there's so many that are unwilling to do that, especially when you get older, especially, let's say, fathers and stuff, when they look like they've already lost their chance. Their kids already turned out in a certain way. And now they're going to defend it because, now that's the problem, is that person, that guy, is now defending it just because he doesn't want to lose face. Mm-hmm. And men do it and women do it, but that in and of itself is the biggest problem right there, is that we've created a culture in past generations, whatever, has created that idea of I can't be wrong. And it's more prevalent, I think, with men than women, just because, the stereotype of women are allowed to change their mind. Okay, great. We should all be allowed to change our mind, actually. We should all learn and grow and stuff. But I
don't know if that's so much true, though, because what is one of the bigger things that's used as a derogatory term against women?
They change their mind a lot.
No, that they're stubborn.
Oh, yeah. I think yes and no. I think those are both stereotypes that can be used to basically whenever a guy, or even a woman, but mostly a guy, needs cover for something that he did wrong. Oh, she's just being so stubborn. That's just women. Now, how about you are just wrong? Right. And she's actually holding to her ideals.
Right. But and then it goes back to that prevalent thing, is if we expect, or men expect, the women to change their mind because what the man says is typically what's supposed to go.
Yeah, and a lot of times the whole point of when the women's changing their mind is because they're trying to freaking please the man, which they don't need to be doing.
Which is then coddling the man's ego.
Exactly.
Which is, I think, the crux of all this is we expect, as men, we're kind of weak. And I think in a sense, my generation of men is weaker than a lot of men before us. I think it's a generational thing. Well, we haven't had to deal with certain things that other generations before us did. I think and this happens. It's like a cycle. They get progressively weaker until they're faced with this huge adversity, and then that makes, tough times make tough men. That's the whole saying, like that whole thing.
And yes, I think what you're saying is partially true, but I also believe that it's also can also be looked at as they're individual decisions, because we know, like, a guy growing up, like, let's say a 12-year-old right now, a 12-year-old living in certain areas is still going to see that he has to be macho because that's how he has to survive.
Right.
But at the same time, a 12-year-old somewhere else might be completely coddled and not even realize that there is sometimes that you do need to stand up for yourself, and that you need to stand up for others, and you need to be pushed back on the prevailing theory of whatever it is. And then the thing is I think, though, by once you get to be in your teens, and certainly when you hit 18 and you get in your 20s, because there's so much communication about all of this, that guys should realize that, okay, I was raised like this, but not all of it is accurate. And I need to make a decision to change that.
Right.
And there's the weakness that they don't. And they'll use the cultural expectations either to their advantage, or they'll use them as actually motivation. But they still need people around them in order to say, hey, I know you were raised that way. It looks like you're conflicted. Let me show you another way.
Right.
And we don't have enough people saying, let me show you another way. In a good sense, meaning like, hey, you don't want to talk about your feelings? You know what? It's okay. You can talk about your feelings. And I'm not talking about any major things. I'm talking about little things, literally like that. Like, hey, and it's supposed to be, oh yeah, guys go to the bar, get a couple drinks and we talk it out and, stuff like that. It's like, no. Usually they don't. Usually it's a gripe fest and you're not talking about it. Right. Just because you griped about it doesn't mean you actually talked about it or worked through it. That's not the same.
True, working through it and coming and finalizing something, figuring it out.
And a lot of that's because one of those guys in that group isn't willing to be like, dude, why are you're wrong. You're wrong. You shouldn't be treating her like that. What the hell? And that kind of thing. Because whether it's peer pressure, whether or not, I don't even know why, in that kind of sense, that it wouldn't be welcomed. Because immediately that either ends up in a fist fight back in the day, or that guy who said you're wrong and stuff is all of a sudden now you don't know what you're talking about. You're whooped. You're a wussy. Blah 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 or whatever. Because
you know what they say?
You're too in touch with your what?
You're not a real man.
Yeah, you know what I mean.
And it comes back to the whole valuation of, for whatever reason, women have been devalued in their contributions, their attributes, their skills. They've been devalued, and then we've propped up men, and we've been running in that type of society. And there are things that have still trickled in from all of that are very prevalent in today's lives and what we do in our relationships unconsciously. Like, I'll catch myself doing certain things. I'm like, wait a minute, why did I do that? Yeah, that doesn't make any sense.
It was because you're programmed like that,
right? And it's gonna, like what you're saying, it's gonna take people who acknowledge that. Hopefully from within themselves, they shouldn't really need to be told.
No, but I hope some of that when you because we can't when you don't raise children in a vacuum, like what you just said, where you see that, where you've been programmed for that, et cetera, et cetera. I hope that at least at some point, it's for lack of a better term, it's my voice saying, why are you thinking that? Why did you think that? Why are you going to make that decision? You know what I mean? It's not literally, of course, but that you were raised to think that some stereotypes actually can be beneficial and just fine, but most aren't. And at least at a minimum, to stop and think about, do I want to say that? Why did I want to say that? How did that pop into my head? And you think about it, and you actually, because those thoughts may come into your mind because that's the way. On Whose Line Is It Anyway? It was a couple weeks ago and stuff. I read an article about the TV show Whose Line Is It Anyway?
Yeah.
And they had a lineup, and it was Brady. I forgot his first name. Wayne Brady. Thank you. And it had a couple other people, and then had a guy who was it was doing a skit. And as they were in a lineup, and he said, "So, which one of you was basically the one that was most suspiciously caught, breaking into something?" And they said the black guy. And it was immediately obvious that, whoa, wait a second, hold on, where did that come from? Because you had a group of people that weren't like that. These are comedians, they've talked, they don't, if you know them and you know their personalities, you know that was not. But society said, this is how the skit's supposed to go. This is how,
Right.
and so they went along with it. That's what. Now, luckily, they corrected it later, where they actually did a rendition where they put one of the white guys and the one who looks kind of like a little more professional and stuff like that. And they said, "So, ma'am, which one is the one that's been taking billions of money from the corporations and sticking it to the and flipped it?" Because because they realized, hey, we need to challenge this stereotype.
Right.
They didn't have to do that. They could have let it go. They could have just talked about it or something else. Mm-hmm. And the point being is that just like what we talked about, is that when those things, those stereotypes, or when those assumptions about being a man come up, mm-hmm. question it. Question it. Is it really because it's being a man, or is it just because it's being a good person or a bad person, and it's couched in this? Well, you can get away with it because technically a man can do that. Mm-hmm. So
yeah, definitely, we've said a lot.
But have we said anything at all?
But have we said much?
Oh, have we said much? Sorry,
Yeah.
I knew that was your thing. So, but anyway, so this will be an ongoing conversation. Hopefully we'll bring on some special guests, and maybe we could talk about it a little deeper, maybe a little bit more specific and detailed, a little more nuanced.
And it would be great to get to talk about this with a woman, like you were saying, get her on, get somebody on the show and further explore this, because honestly we got to points where I was uncomfortable talking about it. It's I don't know. I'd rather just I don't know. It's
a conversation that I think would help with everything else if we could just start to value humans more and quit thinking that because someone is getting more that means someone else is getting less. It just doesn't work out that way. So, in the meantime, think more, care more, live more, and remember, you can change your life. We can change the world one decision at a time. Thanks for listening.